Welcome, fellow rail enthusiasts. In this video, we're going to have a brief overview of how to use warehouses in Railway Empire 2. Before we actually take a look at an example, let's just go over the concept associated with a warehouse. A warehouse is intended to provide a node in a supply chain where we have a source for a particular item that is delivered downstream to a warehouse, the second node, and then that is further delivered to a third node in the supply chain, namely the city with the demand. Now here is the key. The key is, as we will see, that a rail line, the source, will not deliver to a warehouse unless there is a rail line from the city which has a demand coming from that warehouse. So before we will actually see any product being moved from node 1 to node 2, we need to have a rail line between node 2 and node 3, and the city must have a demand for that item. If we have that, then when we create a rail line between nodes 1 and 2, we will see the item being distributed into the warehouse. We then would also be able to look at the warehouse to see where the item is going. So it is extremely important to remember that for merchandise to be moved from the source to the warehouse, we need to have a mechanism for the merchandise to be moved from the warehouse to the city, and the city must have demand. Let's go ahead and take a look at an example. As you can see, we have a rail line going from Indianapolis to our warehouse at Huntington's warehouse. The problem is the rail line is waiting for goods. Even though Indianapolis has the whiskey in stock, it's not delivering it. And as you can see, the warehouse in Huntington is indicating there is no inventory in or coming in. So what is the problem? The problem is we have no demand for that warehouse to supply. So even though St. Louis has a requirement for whiskey, there is no rail line from St. Louis to the warehouse that essentially is going to create the demand that is going to complete the supply chain. That is Indianapolis to the warehouse to St. Louis. So what we do is we're going to go in and we're going to create a train from St. Louis to the warehouse, as you can see, which is what it is we're doing right now. Now, there is no whiskey in the warehouse at this point in time, so the train is going to run from St. Louis and it's going to go to the warehouse. And as you see, we're prioritizing the whiskey, and not until Indianapolis delivers the merchandise to the warehouse will the St. Louis to Huntington warehouse train actually pick the merchandise up. So as you can see, we created this. St. Louis is now waiting for deployment. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to deploy the train. We now can take a look at, if you will, Indianapolis on the screen. And looking at Indianapolis, it's waiting for goods. So we'll start everything up. And what will happen is, there we go. We can now see the demand from St. Louis to the warehouse, because of the rail line we created, is now allowing the rail line from Indianapolis to the warehouse to start to fill the cargo of whiskey to deliver to the warehouse. So it is imperative to remember that if we create a warehouse and we have the item designated in the warehouse, as you can see, and notice we now have 6 coming in, and it's telling us that that's liquor, and when it comes in, we'll actually be able to see where it's going to. It's going to tell us what it is we need. Now, if you take a look here, you're going to see that in this case, the whiskey is designated for St. Louis. Why? Because it's going from Indianapolis to the warehouse. It's being stored in the warehouse. We saw the 6 that are there. The rail line from St. Louis to the warehouse is going to be picking up the merchandise that is designated for St. Louis, and it's going to fulfill St. Louis's need for this particular product. So it is important to, again, remember, we have a rail line that delivers the merchandise to the warehouse, and we have a rail line that takes the merchandise from the warehouse. If we don't have the rail line from the warehouse to the city that needs that product, we're not going to be able to deliver the merchandise. And as you can see, our train is now routing along to its final destination. And as our train from Indianapolis to the warehouse comes to the warehouse station, what will happen is we will offload the whiskey, and now it's going to go from in to actually being stored in the warehouse itself. At this point, the rail line from St. Louis to the warehouse will be able to come to the warehouse station and pick up the merchandise. And as you can see, we've just offloaded all of the merchandise from Indianapolis, in this case the whiskey, and we have offloaded it into the warehouse and now waiting for St. Louis to pick up the product. As the St. Louis train is making its way to the warehouse, what we'll see is that the warehouse merchandise will be pointing to St. Louis. We also will see that in the city of St. Louis, if we look at the inventory, it will indicate that 6 are on its way, which are coming from the warehouse. So this is providing us with, if you will, the supply chain analysis. We have a demand that is being fulfilled from a node on the supply chain, and we have a source that is fulfilling that demand. As you can see, our Warehouse to St. Louis train is now loading the cargo of whiskey, which eventually will bring to St. Louis and deposit into the city's inventory itself. Once it gets there, we're going to see the St. Louis to warehouse train cargo being offloaded, and then it's going to make a return trip to the warehouse so long as there is demand in St. Louis for, in this case, whiskey. Corresponding to this demand cycle, we also would be looking at Indianapolis. And as you can see, Indianapolis is fulfilling its requirement to distribute the whiskey to the warehouse so that the whiskey can be supplied and delivered to St. Louis. This effectively is our supply chain. The most important action to remember is that our supply chain has a source and it has a destination. And the key is the source must be aware that the destination has a demand, which means you must create a rail line from the city to the warehouse so that the rail line from the source to the warehouse can fulfill its obligations. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please give us a like and subscribe.